The metal doors of the merchant ship Star Wanderer slid open with a soft hiss. Jane Reed's boots clicked against the floor as four tall, blue-skinned guards led her through the brightly lit corridor. Their weapons never wavered from her back. She kept her head high, even as other aliens stopped to stare at the human prisoner being marched through their space station. "Keep moving." The guard behind her growled in badly translated English. Jane didn't need the reminder. She had replayed the last 24 hours in her mind 100 times already, trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong. Just yesterday, she had been finishing a routine cargo run to the outer colonies. The Star Wanderer's hold was empty, her crew was happy, and their next job promised good pay. Then the Collective's patrol ships appeared out of nowhere, surrounding her vessel with their weapons ready. The guards now led her into a small white room. A screen on one wall flickered to life, showing the face of a thin, gray-skinned alien. Jane recognized the species. They served as law readers for the Collective. Human Jane Reed. The law reader's voice crackled through hidden speakers. "You stand accused of violating Sacred Law 847, providing advanced technology to pre-spaceflight civilizations. Your ship's logs show you landed on Nexus IV for 3 standard days. This is a forbidden world." Jane's hands clenched into fists. "That's impossible. I've never been anywhere near Nexus IV. Someone changed those logs." The law reader continued as if she hadn't spoken. "The penalty for this crime is death. Your trial will begin in 7 standard days. You will be assigned a defender." The screen went dark, leaving Jane alone with her thoughts and the guards. She knew the Collective's justice system. It was famous for being fair but completely inflexible. Once evidence was presented, the outcome was almost certain. Someone had gone to a lot of trouble to frame her, and they had done a good job. They moved her to a cell next. It was clean but small, with a single bed that was too long for her human frame. The force field hummed at the entrance, its pale blue light casting strange shadows. Through it, she could see other cells, most empty. In one, a creature that looked like a giant caterpillar pressed itself against the barrier, its many eyes blinking at her curiously. Jane sat on the bed, her mind racing. The logs had to have been changed while her ship was docked at Port 7, during the crew's rest period. But getting past her security systems would have taken serious skill and inside knowledge. Someone wanted her gone badly enough to risk breaking into a merchant captain's ship. But why? A new guard appeared outside her cell, smaller than the others and covered in feathers. In its hands was a tablet showing her ship's logs. Jane moved closer to look, careful not to touch the force field. "These are the records that prove your crime," the guard said. Its voice was musical, almost beautiful. 3 days on Nexus IV, trading with the natives. "The evidence is very clear." Jane studied the logs. They looked perfect, too perfect. After 15 years of space travel, logs always had small errors, typing mistakes, or unclear entries. These were clean, every entry exactly right. That was the mistake her enemies had made. No real ship's logs ever looked this good. "I want to see my defender," she said. "It's my right under collective law." The guard blinked its large eyes. "The defender will come tomorrow. Rest now. The trial will be difficult." Left alone again, Jane began to pace. 6 steps forward, 6 steps back. The cell was smaller than her ship's cargo loader. Her crew would be worried. She hoped they had gotten her emergency message before the Collective seized the Star Wanderer. The ship was her life, everything she had worked for since leaving Earth. Through the station's walls, she felt the faint vibration of massive engines keeping them in orbit. Somewhere out there, someone was probably celebrating their success in framing her. They thought they had trapped her perfectly, used the Collective's own justice system as a weapon. But they had made a mistake. They hadn't killed her immediately, and that meant she had time. Time to think, time to plan, time to spot the patterns and weaknesses that everyone else missed. The Collective might be the most powerful force in known space, but they had never dealt with a human captain fighting for her life. Jane Reed stretched out on the too-long bed, closed her eyes, and began to think. The courtroom of Justice Point Station stretched up into darkness. Jane sat alone at a small table, feeling the weight of thousands of alien eyes on her. The room curved in a complete circle, with row after row of seats rising like a giant bowl. Every space was filled with different species, some with too many eyes, others with none at all. The defender assigned to her case stood nearby. The alien called Blue earned that nickname from the soft glow that rippled through its transparent body. Jane had spent the last day trying to explain human concepts of justice to it, but Blue seemed stuck on pure logic and rules. The evidence is complete, Blue had told her earlier. The logs show you were there. In 1,000 cases like this, I have never won. It is logical to accept the punishment. A deep horn sounded, making the air vibrate. From high above, a platform descended. On it stood Judge First Speaker Tall, named for the way its neck stretched up like a crane's. The judge's black robes sparkled with tiny lights that looked like stars. This court is gathered. The judge's voice boomed without any visible translation device. The human Jane Reed stands accused of breaking Sacred Law 847. The penalty is death. Let truth be shown. Screens appeared in the air around the courtroom. They showed the fake logs from Jane's ship, spinning slowly for all to see. More screens popped up with pictures of Nexus IV, a green and blue world where the natives had just discovered steam power. The evidence is clear. A new voice called out. The prosecutor stepped forward, its red scales gleaming under the bright lights. This human landed on Nexus IV for 3 days. Our sensors detected energy readings matching her ship's engines. The logs confirm everything. Jane started to stand, but Blue's cold hand touched her arm. Wait, it whispered. There is a process. Speaking out of turn will only make things worse. She forced herself to sit still as the prosecutor continued. We have protected developing worlds for 10,000 years. This law keeps balance in the galaxy. Without it, chaos would spread as younger races gain power too quickly. The judge's neck swayed as it considered these words. Defender Blue, you may speak. Blue's glow pulsed slightly brighter as it stood. The evidence appears complete. However, I request time to examine the sensor readings more closely. The law allows 3 days for this. A murmur ran through the crowd. Jane looked at Blue with surprise. The defender had seemed ready to give up earlier, but now it was buying them time. Maybe it had learned something about human hope after all. Granted, the judge said, but no more delays will be allowed. This court values efficiency. As guards led Jane back to her cell, she noticed something odd. The station's lighting changed for a moment during the shift change, creating a brief shadow. In that shadow, she saw a maintenance worker watching her. He looked human. The worker quickly turned away, but Jane had caught his slight nod. Her heart beat faster. Maybe she wasn't as alone here as everyone thought. Back in her cell, Jane started counting the seconds between guard patrols. She noticed the feathered guard from yesterday was gone, replaced by one with scales like the prosecutor. This one didn't speak to her at all. Blue visited her an hour later. I will study the sensor readings, it said. But you should prepare yourself. Even if we find small errors, it will not be enough. The collective's justice system values order above all. What about actual justice? Jane asked. What if someone changed those logs? Shouldn't that matter more than just following rules? Blue's glow dimmed slightly. You humans always ask such strange questions. Rules are what keep us safe. Without them, we would have destroyed ourselves long ago. Rules without justice are just chains, Jane said quietly, and humans are very good at breaking chains. Blue stared at her for a long moment. I begin to understand why some species fear humans, it said finally. You think in ways that are unexpected. After Blue left, Jane lay on her bed and stared at the ceiling. 3 days. She had 3 days before the trial would continue. 3 days to figure out who had framed her and why. 3 days to find a way to prove her innocence, or to plan something much more dangerous. She smiled slightly in the darkness. Humans had always been good at making the most of whatever time they had. The maintenance worker appeared again during Jane's next trip to the courtroom. This time, he was fixing a panel in the corridor, and the guards paid him no attention at all. As Jane walked past, he dropped a small tool. The clang of metal hitting the floor made the guards turn their heads for just a moment. In that split second, the worker whispered, "Port 7. Ring of 7. Watch the walls." Then he was picking up his tool, apologizing to the guards in a thick accent that hadn't been there before. Jane kept her face blank, but her mind raced. Port 7, where her ship had been docked when the logs were changed. Ring of 7. She had heard that name before. A group of wealthy merchants who controlled many trade routes. And the walls, she wasn't sure about that yet. Later, in her cell, she started watching the walls more carefully. The surface seemed to ripple every few hours, like waves moving through metal. Some kind of cleaning system, maybe, or temperature control. She filed the information away, adding it to her growing mental map of the station's patterns. Blue visited again, carrying more screens filled with data. "The sensor readings are strange," it said, its glow pulsing with what Jane had learned was confusion. "They show your ship's energy signature, but what?" Jane leaned forward. "The pattern is too perfect, like the logs." Blue's transparent form rippled. "Real ships leave messy trails. Engines heat up differently each time. But these readings, they're like a copy of a copy." Jane felt a spark of hope. "Can you prove they're fake?" "No." Blue dimmed slightly. "I can say they're unusual, but the court won't care. They only want to know if a ship matching yours was there. These readings say yes." The maintenance worker appeared a third time while Jane was being taken to the station's food hall. He was mopping the floor, and this time Jane noticed something odd about his uniform. A small pin on his collar showed 3 dots in a triangle, exactly like the pattern she'd seen in the rippling walls. He worked his way closer, pretending to clean. When he was near enough, he spoke so quietly Jane barely heard him. "Name's Tom. Office of Naval Intelligence. Been watching Ring of 7 for months. They're doing something big, something bad. You got in their way." Jane wanted to ask more, but the guards were already moving her along. She did notice that Tom's mop had left a pattern on the floor, 3 small wet circles that dried in seconds. Back in her cell, Jane started putting it together. The wall ripples came in sets of 3. The maintenance worker's pin had 3 dots. He had given her 3 pieces of information. It was a code, a way to prove he was really helping her. A new guard brought her dinner, some kind of blue soup that tasted like metal. This guard was different, more watchful. Jane noticed it kept touching a ring on its middle finger, a ring with 7 small stones. She pretended not to notice, but her heart beat faster. They were watching her through their own people. The Ring of 7 had agents even here, in the collective's most secure station. That's why they had chosen this method to get rid of her. They could control every part of her arrest and trial. That night, unable to sleep, Jane counted the wall ripples again. 3 waves, then nothing for exactly 7 minutes. 3 more waves. The pattern never changed. She thought about what Tom had said. Something big, something bad. What had she stumbled into? What had the Ring of 7 been doing that was worth risking a frame-up in front of the entire collective? Blue appeared early the next morning, its glow dimmer than usual. "The trial resumes in 2 days. I have found small problems in the evidence, but..." It trailed off, frustrated. "What about the Ring of 7? Jane asked carefully, watching the defender's reaction. Blue's glow flickered sharply. "Do not speak that name," it whispered. "The walls have ears, and the ring has agents everywhere. They took my last client, after I asked too many questions." Jane nodded slowly. Now she knew. Blue wasn't just afraid of losing the case. It was afraid of the ring, which meant she had a choice: stay quiet and die, or risk everything on a plan that was starting to form in her mind. She smiled at Blue. "Tell me more about how the station's security systems work during shift changes." Tom stood in the empty storage room, his hands moving quickly over a small screen. Jane sat on an old crate nearby, while Blue kept watch at the door. They had exactly 7 minutes before the next guard patrol would pass. "Look at this," Tom said, showing Jane the screen. "Ring of 7 ships visited Nexus IV 20 times in the last month. They're not just breaking the law. They're strip mining the planet, stealing resources while the natives think they're seeing gods." Jane felt sick. "That's why they needed me gone. My trade route went too close to Nexus IV. I might have spotted their ships." "Exactly." Tom's fingers danced over the screen again. "But proving it won't be easy. The ring controls too many judges, too many guards, and they've hidden their evidence well." Blue's glow pulsed with worry. Even with this proof, the appeal process would take 30 days minimum. The execution is scheduled for 7 days from now. The sound of heavy footsteps made them all freeze. Tom quickly shut off his screen and pretended to check some pipes. Jane slumped against the wall like a prisoner taking a rest break, while Blue adopted the stiff pose of a guard. The footsteps passed without stopping. Later, back in her cell, Jane studied the data Tom had secretly transferred to her food tray's bottom. The ring's operation was huge. They weren't just stealing resources, they were selling advanced weapons to the natives of Nexus IV. They were preparing for something big, something that would break not just one sacred law, but many. The guard with the 7-stone ring appeared again, watching Jane with cold eyes. She pretended to sleep, but her mind was racing. The ring had people everywhere, which meant her every move was being watched. Any evidence they gathered would have to be protected, hidden where the ring couldn't destroy it. Blue visited just before lights out, its transparent form barely visible in the dim light. "I found more problems in their evidence," it whispered. "The ship's energy signature, it's actually from 3 different ships, combined to look like one. Very clever, very illegal. But it would take too long to prove in court," Jane finished. She was starting to see why humans frustrated the collective so much. Their justice system was perfect, logical, and completely unable to handle clever criminals who knew how to exploit it. Tom appeared the next morning, mopping the same floor for the 3rd time. As Jane passed him on her way to the daily court session, he muttered, "They're moving up the execution. 4 days now, not 7. Someone's nervous." Jane felt a chill. The ring must know they were gathering evidence. They were trying to kill her before the truth could come out. She looked at the walls as she walked, counting the ripples. 3 waves, 7 minutes, over and over. There was something important about that pattern, something she was missing. In the courtroom, the prosecutor seemed smug. "We request the execution be moved forward, due to security concerns," it announced. "The human has been seen talking to unauthorized personnel." Judge First Speaker Tall's neck swayed as it considered this. "Granted. The execution will take place in 4 days. Justice must be swift." Blue's glow dimmed so much it almost disappeared. But Jane wasn't afraid. She was angry. The ring thought they had trapped her, but they had actually given her everything she needed. The security patterns, the wall ripples, the guard rotations, it was all part of a puzzle she was finally starting to solve. That night, she lay in her cell, staring at the ceiling. "Tell me about the maintenance systems," she said quietly to Blue, who had stayed late to discuss the trial. "The ones that make the walls ripple." "Those control everything," Blue said. "Power, air, security. They pulse every 3 hours to clean the station's systems." "Why?" Jane smiled in the darkness. "Just curious. And the guard shifts. They change every 7 hours, right? With a 3-minute overlap." "Yes, but..." Blue's glow pulsed with sudden understanding. "You're planning something. Something dangerous." "No," Jane said softly. "I'm planning something impossible. but humans are good at that. The question is, Blue, when the time comes, will you help? The defender's glow flickered for a long moment before steadying. Yes, it said finally. Justice matters more than rules. The ring must be stopped. 3 waves, 7 minutes. Jane closed her eyes, already counting the seconds in her head. She had 4 days to do the impossible. 3 days before the execution, Jane walked her usual path to the courtroom. Her eyes tracked every detail. The way the guards changed positions, how the lighting shifted during the wall ripples, which maintenance panels opened during cleaning cycles. Most species couldn't spot these patterns. Their brains worked differently, seeing each moment as separate from the last. But humans were built to find connections. Tom had left her another message, hidden in the cleaning schedule posted on the wall. Between the ordinary times and dates, she spotted the key information. The ring's ships were gathering near Nexus IV. Whatever they were planning would happen soon. In the courtroom, Jane watched Blue argue about the sensor readings again. The defender's glow was stronger today, more confident. They had found proof that the readings were fake, energy signatures that overlapped in impossible ways. But the judge barely listened. The time for evidence is past, Judge First Speaker Tall announced. We move now to final preparations for sentencing. Jane noticed something she hadn't seen before. When the judge spoke, its robe shifted, revealing a small 7-stone ring. Her heart beat faster. Even the judge was part of the ring's plan. This wasn't just about her anymore. The entire justice system was corrupt. Back in her cell, Jane started putting her plan together. She had spotted 27 cameras in the corridors between her cell and the execution chamber. During shift changes, each camera had a 3-second blind spot. The wall ripples interfered with motion sensors for exactly 7 seconds. It's impossible, Blue said when she explained it. No one can move that fast. The timing would have to be perfect. Humans are good at timing, Jane replied. We learned it hunting thousands of years ago. Our brains process patterns faster than any other species. That's why the ring hates us. We see things others miss. Tom visited next, pretending to fix her cell's lighting. Got it all recorded, he whispered. Everything about their mining operation. The weapons, the bribes. But they're watching all communications. Can't send it out. Jane smiled. We won't need to send it. I have a better idea. She explained her plan, watching Tom's eyes widen. That's crazy, he said finally. The timing would have to be perfect. One mistake, and then we won't make any mistakes. Jane looked at the walls, watching another ripple pattern start. 3 waves, 7 minutes, over and over. They built their whole system on those numbers, thinking no one could use them all at once. But they never met a human hunter before. Later, Blue returned with more news. The execution chamber's power cycles matched the wall ripples. When the ripples peak, the chamber draws extra power, creating a 2-second surge in the nearby systems. Jane nodded, another piece of the puzzle falling into place. And the guard rotations. 3 guards at each post. 7 posts between here and the chamber. Changes every 3 hours, with a 7-minute overlap. Blue's glow pulsed rapidly. I still don't see how this helps. Trust me, Jane said. Humans are pattern hunters. It's how we survived on Earth when bigger, stronger animals wanted to eat us. We learned to see the gaps, the moments when everything lines up just right. She spent that night memorizing every detail. The camera angles, the guard paths, the power surges. In her mind, she walked the route over and over, counting seconds between each ripple, each shift change, each power surge. Tom made his final preparations too. He reprogrammed maintenance drones to create specific failures at specific times. Nothing big enough to raise alarms, just small problems that would pull attention away from Jane's path. Blue watched it all with growing amazement. You really think this will work? It has to, Jane said. The ring is planning something big on Nexus IV, something that will hurt a lot of innocent people. We're the only ones who can stop them. She lay back on her too-long bed, counting ripples in the walls. 3 days until the execution. 3 days to perfect every detail. 3 days until she would prove why humans were the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Not because they were strong or fast, but because they could see the patterns that everyone else thought were impossible to connect. In the darkness, Jane smiled. The ring thought they had trapped her in their perfect system, but they had actually given her everything she needed to break free. After all, humans had been breaking out of traps since they first looked up at the stars and decided to reach them. The morning of her execution, Jane woke before the cell lights came on. She lay still, counting the wall ripples one last time. Her entire plan depended on timing. Hitting each corridor at exactly the right second, when cameras shifted and sensors reset. The guard with the 7-stone ring came to get her, along with 2 others. Jane recognized the smug look in its eyes. The ring thought they had won. She kept her head down, playing the part of a defeated prisoner, but her mind was racing through the timing of her plan. "Walk," the guard ordered, pushing her forward. Jane started counting in her head. 3 steps, pause. 7 steps, pause, matching her pace to the station's rhythms. They passed Tom in the first corridor. He was checking a panel, his tools spread out around him. Their eyes met for just a moment. He gave the smallest nod. Everything was ready. The first wall ripple started right on schedule. Jane felt it more than saw it, a vibration running through the metal floor. 1 minute until the guard shift change. 2 minutes until the power surge. 3 minutes until everything would happen at once. Blue waited at the junction leading to the execution chamber. As her defender, "I will escort her the final distance," it announced. The guards looked uncertain, but station law was clear. They had to let Blue take over. As soon as the guards stepped away, Jane heard the first alarm. Somewhere in the lower levels, maintenance drones were creating careful chaos. Nothing dangerous, just enough problems to pull guards and technicians away from their posts. 20 seconds, Blue whispered. Its glow was so dim it was almost invisible. The cameras will shift. Then the power surge then. Jane was already moving. The first camera turned, creating a 3-second blind spot. She slipped past it just as the power surged, making the lights flicker. Down the corridor, more alarms started ringing. "Warning," the station's voice announced. "Multiple system failures detected. All non-essential personnel please remain in place." The next corridor was trickier. 3 cameras, overlapping fields of view, with only a 2-second gap when they all shifted at once. Jane counted under her breath, feeling the rhythm of the station's systems. A wall ripple started, right on time. Now, she moved like water through the gaps in the security, each step timed to the station's pulses. Behind her, Blue called out, "The prisoner. She's escaping." Its voice was perfectly panicked, sending guards running in exactly the wrong direction. More alarms joined the chaos. Tom's maintenance drones had started their symphony of carefully planned failures. Doors opened and closed randomly. Lights flickered in patterns that confused the station's motion sensors. The ring's perfect system was coming apart. Jane reached the maintenance shaft exactly 7 minutes after her escape began. She pulled herself inside just as another wall ripple started, masking her heat signature from the sensors. Above her, she heard guards running past, following Blue's false trail. The shaft was tight, but Jane had memorized its layout from Tom's maintenance schedules. 3 levels up, 7 sections over. She climbed quickly, timing her movements to the station's rhythms. Each time she passed a sensor, a power surge or wall ripple hid in it. She was halfway to her goal when the station's voice changed. "Warning. Human prisoner escape in progress. All security personnel to level 3. Perfect. They thought she was still back there, following the false trail Blue had created. Instead, Jane was almost to the station's main communication center. The ring had been so busy watching the obvious escape routes, the shuttle bays, the cargo holds, that they hadn't considered what else a human might do. One last corridor stretched between her and the communication room. It was the most heavily guarded part of the station, but Jane had spotted the flaw in its security days ago. The Ring's people were so confident in their system that they never varied it. Every 7 minutes for 3 seconds, every camera turned to run a self-diagnostic. Jane pressed herself against the wall, feeling the ripples move through it. The cameras turned. The power surged. The sensors reset. She ran. The communication center's door slid open with a soft hiss. Jane moved fast, her hands finding the controls she had memorized from Tom's station diagrams. 3 guards lay unconscious behind her, victims of the sleeping gas Tom's drones had released during the last power surge. She had exactly 3 minutes before the system would detect her override. Her fingers flew across the controls, accessing the station's main broadcast network. The Ring had been so careful to watch every escape route that they had forgotten humans were hunters, and hunters knew that sometimes the best escape was to stand and fight. Broadcasting now, she whispered to herself, plugging in the data chip Tom had given her. Every screen in the station flickered to life at once. Every communication channel opened. Even the personal devices that each alien carried began to display the evidence. Ships landing on Nexus IV. Ring members taking bribes. Weapons being sold to the natives. The corruption went deeper than even Jane had guessed. And now everyone could see it. "This is the truth," Jane's voice echoed through the station. "The Ring of Seven isn't protecting anyone. They're breaking every law they claim to uphold. And they tried to kill me to keep it secret." Alarms blared as security forces finally realized where she was. But it was too late. The evidence was already spreading across not just the station, but the entire collective network. The Ring couldn't stop it now. The door burst open. The guard with the 7-stone ring rushed in, weapon raised. But it stopped short when it saw Jane's smile. "It's over," she said quietly. "Look at your screens. Everyone knows now. Even your own people are seeing the truth." The guard's weapon wavered. On every screen, more evidence kept playing. Ships full of stolen resources, secret meetings with weapons dealers, Judge First Speaker Tall accepting bribes. Blue appeared in the doorway behind the guard, its glow bright and steady. "Drop your weapon," it ordered. "By the authority of the Collective Justice Office, you are under arrest." More security forces arrived, but these weren't Ring members. They were the real station security, and they had seen the evidence too. The guard looked around, realizing it was surrounded, and slowly lowered its weapon. Hours later, Jane sat in the same courtroom where she had been sentenced to death. But now she faced a different judge, one chosen by the Collective's Emergency Council. The room was in chaos as officials argued about the scope of the Ring's corruption. "The evidence is overwhelming," the new judge announced. "The Ring of Seven has broken our most sacred laws. Their agents have been arrested. Their operations are shut down." It turned to Jane. "As for you." Jane stood straight, ready to face whatever came next. But the judge's next words surprised her. "You broke several station regulations during your escape," it said. "However, you did so to expose a greater crime. More importantly, you chose to broadcast the truth rather than simply escape. The collective values justice above all else, even if we sometimes forget that justice and rules are not always the same thing." The judge's voice grew louder. "Jane Reed, you are cleared of all charges. Furthermore, the collective wishes to extend an offer. We need humans like you, ones who can see patterns we miss, who can think in ways we don't. Would you consider becoming our first human investigator?" Jane thought about it for a moment. She looked at Blue, whose glow rippled with encouragement. At Tom, who gave her a slight nod. At the hundreds of aliens watching, learning that sometimes breaking the rules was necessary to serve true justice. "I'll accept," she said finally, "on one condition. The collective needs to change some of its laws. Justice shouldn't be about perfect evidence and rigid rules. It should be about protecting people, all people, even those on worlds like Nexus IV. The judge considered this. Perhaps, it said slowly, it is time for our laws to evolve. And perhaps we need humans to help us see where they should change. Jane smiled as she left the courtroom, free for the first time in days. The station's walls still rippled every 3 minutes. The cameras still shifted every 7. But now these patterns weren't a trap. They were a reminder that sometimes the best way to change a system was to understand it completely. Blue walked beside her, its glow bright with pride. "You know," it said, "I think I finally understand why humans scare some species so much. It's not because you're dangerous. It's because you make us question things we never thought to question before." "That's what humans do," Jane replied simply. "We look at the impossible and find a way to make it possible. And now, thanks to the ring's mistake, the whole collective will learn what that means." Above them, the stars shined through the station's windows, promising new challenges, new patterns to understand, and new ways to define justice.